Well, thank you all for joining us. We're going to give people a few more minutes before we begin.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Oh, Liz.
So what time is it there, Liz? Oh, there you are, Emmanuel. I was just about to send Daryl a text too because you weren't here. I was
Hey there, how are you?
like, hey, good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Seriously, Liz, what time is it in Dubai right now?
In India, it is 4:04 a.m.
Thanks for joining us.
In Dubai?
I'm in Mumbai, in India.
Oh, Mumbai. That's right, India.
Oh, I thought you said Dubai, okay.
I did. That's where I thought you were actually. Yes. So that was my confusion.
I don't know if you remember, but we used to work together.
Your sound is fading out, or you guys work together?
I recall, Liz. How have you been?
How are you guys?
Fantastic. Good to see you. Yeah, it's okay. Your audio is in and out.
Let me plug in and see if that helps. How about that?
When you're close like that, it definitely helps. So when you come forward, I don't know. Yeah, maybe it's the microphone on the
Probably. Let me
program. Who knows?
see what I can do. I may just have to be mindful of being close.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you met Jane as well, Apostle? From
So Jane,
CNA?
yeah, Jane, I don't know if you know, but we used to work together many years ago.
I think so, yes. As soon as I saw your face, I was like, oh, they asked me, do you know Liz Brackman? I think maybe, but I'm not sure. And then as soon as I saw your face, I was like, oh, of course we did. Nice to see you again.
Very small world.
It
Small
is.
town, Chicago, isn't it?
It is. It is.
All right, I think we can get started now. We're at 5:36. All right, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining us for tonight's event, The Future of Work, Pivots and Moving Forward. I'm Omanar Caldwell, the Director of Corporate Partnerships for Genesis Work Chicago, and I'm excited to see everyone here to discuss the future of work. Now, across the city, companies continue to return to the office with a recent survey showing 80% of Chicago companies expect to be back in the office at least 3 days a week by May. In fact, next week, May 2nd through the 6th, is Chicago Returns Week, which the Honorable Mayor, Lori Lightfoot, described as a week-long celebration as employees, employers, residents, tourists return to downtown Chicago and support local businesses and help the economy recover. However, returning to work looks different for most of us. Even for companies with remote options pre-pandemic, I think all of us may be a little sick of hearing the phrase new normal. But for Genesis Works young professionals and many others who joined the workforce over the last 2 years, remote work is normal. Tonight's panelists will explore how focusing on staff culture, building buy-in, and purposeful discussions have helped their teams move forward. It is my pleasure to introduce Emanuel Williamson, our panel moderator. Emanuel is a Genesis Work alum and a Chicago board member, and Emanuel works as a private equity analyst at Mizero.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aminara, and thank you everyone for being here with us this evening. As Aminara shared, I'm Emanuel Williamson, and I'm a Genesis Works alumni. I initially interned in the collateral department at the private bank, now CIBC, but recently started working with the investment banking team as an intern in 2020. Then slowly went fully remote because it was like a slower market and dealing with COVID. Just recently graduating this past May with a bachelor's in economics, minor in Africana studies. So post-graduation, I ended up working with the investment banking team after the internship, working full-time. Very exciting market, very busy, in office every day. And just last week, transitioned over to the buy side in the private equity group here. And that's definitely enough for me. So I would like to introduce the panelists, starting with Daryl Henry. He's the president and CEO of Diversified Technology. Liz Rafferty is the Chief People Officer of Merkle, and Jane Purcell is the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer. Now, starting with the first question, as I already kind of took your spotlight, please introduce yourself, including your current role in the company, and share your company's transition over the past few years. Starting with Daryl, if that's fine.
Sure. Okay. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Daryl Henry, President, CEO of DTI. We are an IT services firm primarily focused on enterprise integration and implementation. So it's been a really interesting past couple of years as we reluctantly transitioned from 100% in office to at some point, like many others, being 100% remote or virtual. I will say that we had some challenges. A lot of what makes us our special sauce, if you will, is the culture of our firm, and so it's very difficult maintaining or transitioning that culture virtually, right? To have the same chemistry that you have with the organization when you can have, i.e. water cooler talk or lunches or et cetera, that continue to build chemistry and that I guess that kind of organic chemistry is what I like to call it. It's very difficult to achieve that where everything has to be structured. There is no, let me just pop over to Emanuel's desk and ask him this question right quick. There is none of that, right? Everything has to be structured. Every call has to be scheduled. I mean, I guess I can IM you, but that just really isn't the same. And so trying to create and replicate that was definitely a challenge, I think, for our organization. So I'm really interested to see how others kind of face that same challenge, and also understand that we're a small organization, so chemistry is very important for our organization. But it'll be interesting to see how CME and others face that similar challenge.
Thank you, Daryl. I'd like to hear from Jane or Liz.
Sure, I can go next. I am the Chief Information Officer at CNA. CNA is, most people know us in Chicago as having owned the big red building on the lake for a long time. We actually are now on the opposite side of the loop. So that move happened about 4 years ago or so. CNA is a commercial insurance company. So think about your Allstates and your State Farms. That's who you buy from for your personal use. We sell insurance to companies, kind of the same idea. So I joined CNA in at the end of September of 2019. I was really excited to work for a Chicago-based company 5 miles from my house. And summarily 5 months later, we all went remote, and now we've been remote for 2 years. So it was an interesting journey for me personally. And we've been fully remote, although open for voluntary. So if you wanted to use the office starting about a year ago, you could. But what it meant as a leader is you couldn't ask people to come in. You couldn't ask them to come meet with you. If somebody offered or suggested, on a voluntary basis, they certainly could. So I echo what Daryl said, right? Building, as a brand new leader in a brand new company to me and a brand new team, trying to really build that camaraderie, that chemistry that Daryl talked about, get to know people as people. I had to really be creative and think differently. I know we'll get into that a little bit later this evening. So we are still voluntary. We have finally announced we are going back into the office starting the middle of May. And it's going to look slightly different by group. So I run technology, obviously, and we've successfully executed in this remote environment for 2 years. So we're going to go back on average a day a week. That's what we're going to start with. And what we're focused on is really how do we make people want to use the office for those kinds of things that, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about. So that's really where we are. And it's certainly been an interesting 2.5 years for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Jane. And now can we hear from Liz?
Sure. Hopefully you all can hear me. I work with Merkle. We are a marketing and data company, globally based, as I sit here in India. I'm glad to be with all of you. And I think this is a bit of an example of the hybrid and the future of work. I'm here in India, haven't been on the road for probably 2 years and have been out visiting our teams in different countries. For us as a company, we are going to a model of purposeful work. So you work from where you need to. If you need to come in the office to interact with your team members, work on a client pitch, have a performance review, whatever it might be, then that is the purpose and that is the intent. We actually have a beautiful office in Chicago. So we're trying to get everyone to come in and see the new space. If you have calls all day and you can work remotely from your home, then that is the model. And so a big part for us is about how do we create culture, and Daryl, you mentioned it as well. How do you create culture for people that work maybe 100% remotely, whereas people that are coming into the office and might be able to take advantage of social activities or community activities or things of that nature. And so we're very focused on creating balance, culture, and connection for everyone, whether they're in the office 1 day a week, 5 days a week, or no days a week. And that's kind of the space that we're in, and we're really anchoring to being purposeful about where and how you work.
Thank you, Liz. Moving on to the next question. As you think about the last 2 years, what was the biggest change in how your company worked, and what was the impact? And then I'm going to follow that on with a portion B of this question. What changes do you see becoming permanent to the way you operate or your staff culture? And since Liz went last, we want you to go first for this one.
Okay, Manuel, say that one more time for me, if you would. Repeat the question.
No worries. The first part is, as you think about the last 2 years, what was the biggest change in how your company worked, and what was the impact? And then part B was, what changes do you see becoming permanent to the way you operate or your current staff culture?
Thank you. I think, honestly, the whole COVID period, as I like to say, was a change. We had never experienced anything of that sort. We were dealing with furloughs and different employee, things, support mechanisms that we had never really dealt with before. We spent a great deal of effort and worked with our teams around employee support through our business resource groups. So we have a mental health resource group. We have our ethnicity resource groups, our military resource groups. So making sure that we were working with those entities and the teams in those spaces to provide every support possible to our employees through that period, whether they were parents or individuals working in different locations. So that in and of itself was a change for us. I think going forward, I know we hear about this great resignation. Has anyone heard of that? I don't know if you have. And I shared this with the teams here yesterday. I think it is about a great reevaluation. I think people are making choices that they couldn't make during COVID. They couldn't go to the movies, or we couldn't go out to dinner. And so people are reevaluating what's most important to them, whether it's changing jobs, changing locations, or moving, being closer to family. It's individuals are reevaluating their purpose and life. And so what we're trying to do is really ensure that we are providing a place that individuals can find that purpose and the belonging through their work, that it's not an additional thing that they're doing, that, you know, we have opportunity to connect with our communities, we have opportunities to connect with each other through the work that people are doing. So I think that is what we've taken away from the COVID period, is helping individuals create a better sense of balance through their work and their home lives.
Thank you, Liz. Now, can we hear from Jane?
Sure. So some of my answers certainly less, I'd call it more tactical, candidly, than Liz. So although a lot of what Liz talked about resonates with me too, in terms of, you know, the way that you're talking about that great reevaluation, I think you're absolutely right. And I do think that that's going to be something that all companies are going to have to think about when they think about, you know, employees and creating a space for everybody to be together. When I say tactical, it's because when I joined CNA, I hadn't had a desk phone in like 15 years. In fact, I had to have somebody teach me how to use the desk phone, and they all thought I was kidding. And I was like, no, I am in fact not kidding. I've been using a soft phone on my computer, you know, forever. So it was a very location-centric company, you know, it just was. I mean, we certainly had partners that were in India or in Europe, and we have European parts of our business, Canada, et cetera. But people were used to the building. And I remember logging into basically into Teams, and no one was logged into it. Like 30% of the company was, and that was it. Which was, again, a huge change for somebody who's coming from a place where we were just used to remote work. So for CNA, it was a pretty dramatic shift. We had to teach people how to use the collaboration technologies, you know, much more directly. People had to get used to figuring out, like, well, how do you build camaraderie in that way? So, you know, we made small kind of changes about how we started meetings and who we talked to and that sort of thing. But it took a while. And then we also found some actual shifts in our business completely. So functions that insurance companies were saying for years could not possibly be done remotely. You didn't have a choice. No one was in the building. You were supposed to go inspect. So how in the world are you going to do a risk management review if you can't go there, right? So we had to sort it out. And actually what we found was a better model. Clients liked it better even when they did return. So there's actual operational pieces of our business that are never going to go back to the way that it was before. And I think for, you know, a really old industry like insurance, even though we do a lot of really cool kind of cutting edge things, I think it pushed the industry in general for us to this place of saying, well, okay, the thing I said I could never, now I don't have an option. So how am I going to do it? And really kind of moved companies and people and teams and processes sort of into a different place. So, you know, things like those process changes, we're not going to go back and do that differently. Things like, you know, having people be available on Teams all the time and truly use it for the kind of collaboration that you really want to use that technology for. It's not just about video conferencing with people. I don't think we'll ever go back. So some of those types of changes will stick. However, I'm sad to report I will still have a desk phone. I'm just going to have to get used to it.
Thank you, Jane. And I also still figuring out how to use my desk phone as well.
I'm glad I'm not the only one, Emanuel.
Now we'll hear from Daryl.
Yeah, I think I still struggle trying to transfer calls. You know, for us, everything was so different, right? Funny side note, I remember, Emanuel, when there was a young lady in our office and she set us up on Teams. And I remember thinking, oh my God, why would we ever need that? and you know, who knew that it would become our daily lifeblood, right? Our lifeline. So it became really interesting. As I mentioned, we're a smaller firm, a diverse firm. And so learning how to navigate in this new environment, so much of our business is relationship driven. It is lunches. It is, shaking hands and kissing babies. It is really being very interactive, and now we can't be. And so how do we, how do we navigate through those waters? And we don't do a lot of direct to customer. Our primary customers are, like Deloitte, Accenture, PwC, and we support them on very large engagements. And so even they had similar issues, right? How do they, there's no longer the opportunity for them to walk the halls and pop in on on an IT manager's office and say, hey, what do you think about this or that? Or so that became a challenge. And then also what was really interesting, and I don't know if we can, if I'm shifting gears but it was part of our transformation, certainly, is now in the midst of this, of COVID and just coming to grips with that. And now George Floyd happens, right? And so then our entire world changed, right? Because as a diverse firm, our clients wanted to hear our points of view. They wanted to engage with us. They wanted to talk to us. And then it changed. We were hiring. So now you have to hire people who will never see the inside of your office, and you'll never meet, at least for some time, right? So what is that like? And so it was really, really tough. And I am very, very much a relationship person. I am not, nor will I ever be a virtual only type person. So I think it was really, really figuring out how to engage with people and have those same type of touchy-feely relationships that we have in business and or even with our teams internally, where we know our children's sports that they play and their birth dates and the things that our spouses or partners like to do, or all of these things that make us, right? How do we recreate that? And learning to recreate those things virtually was really, really important for us. I'm not certain that we ever accomplished it, but I think we did as well as could be achieved virtually.
Thank you, Daryl. And moving on to the next question, which is perfect because you just touched on it a bit. For many of us, exposure has led to keep opportunities to learn and grow as employees. And some of our best ideas have come from conversations around a coffee or snack machine. And I want to know, how has this shifted over the last 2 years? And then similar to the first question, part B, how do you envision finding a balance moving forward? And for this one, let's start with Jane.
Sure. And I swear Daryl and I didn't compare notes before this. So, I mean, we had to do some small things, right? Because that exactly as you described, Daryl, like without the coffee chats, we had to change the way we did things. So normally we would, when we start a meeting, we'd kind of, we'd jump into it, right? And I had to be very intentional about, and my leaders had to be intentional about, let's take 5 or even 10 minutes out of a meeting and ask, how was your weekend? What did you do? Did you go see that movie you were talking about? Did you love it as much as you thought you did? How's that plant you put in your backyard? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, right? But that way to get to know each other was really important. And then we at CNA, the reason I mentioned it, Daryl, when you talked about George Floyd, we had been on a D&I kind of a journey, and there was a program that they had really started at CNA that was all about the inclusion part of it and how to create an inclusive environment. And what I really am very proud about being part of this company, the way they did it was, it became much more about listening, understanding somebody else's point of view, just seeking to understand and figuring out how to create an environment where people could bring their whole selves to work. And that program, they created things like, okay, the first habit we're going to practice is this, and there'd be some small bite-sized training, and then we practice. And interestingly, what I found with my team was we would practice these habits together over video, and people were actually almost more open to being vulnerable over video, because there's something about having a screen, like I'm really okay with telling you maybe something a little bit more private, because in some ways I still feel like I'm private because I'm sitting in this room by myself. It's an interesting dynamic that I did not understand. And you take that coupled with these conversations that we needed to have, that we need to always be having, but we hadn't yet, not in a real way. It made for some really powerful relationship building and really getting to know people on a very different level. I do not pretend to be all the way there. I don't pretend our organization's all the way there. We got a long way to go. I'm always learning. But that was one of the things that, during the pandemic, I think we took advantage of the fact that we needed to have that conversation. We used it to our advantage, because once we had teams that were more vulnerable with each other, you could throw out the crazy ideas, right? People are way more creative when they're not worried that my boss, the person that sits next to me, whoever is going to think that's a terrible idea. Are you nuts? Like, you don't understand our business at all. People are more open. So it had this interesting consequence of getting to more creativity as well inside of our team. So for me, it's going to be about leveraging, what Liz talked about, that intentional, like, when are we using the office? When are we letting people work at home or remote? Like, how, and when I say letting, when are they deciding on the basis of what they're doing? And how do we continue to try to take advantage of that to keep building our teams and our relationships?
Thank you, Jane. And moving forward to Liz.
Yeah, I think, Jane, to your point, I think it goes back to the intentionality, right? We focus a lot on our people managers or career advocates, excuse me, as we refer to them. And so working in a virtual environment and having those connections and having the conversations takes more intentionality to do that. And so we've provided a lot of resources and tools to our career advocates to enable them. So we have a forum that we call our Priorities and Satisfaction Forum. And it's meant to be a discussion tool that you can have a conversation with your leader about your work-life balance, if that is a concern or an area of focus, or you want additional learning opportunities, or whatever those things might be. We try to make sure that people have tools and resources they can have that conversation. We also encourage people to work with the business resource groups that I mentioned before, and also our HR team, to ensure that people know they have many different avenues to go to talk through whatever their needs may be, or different things. We've also done a lot to try to enhance our benefit programs to support people in different ways, and in ways that are maybe more meaningful now. Childcare offerings, as an example, things like that. The flexible working, Jane, to your point, making sure that people have technology so they can work from home if that is what they're going to be doing primarily. So I think it goes back to, again, I would agree, the same intentionality, being intentional about the conversations, being intentional about those discussions, and using different resources that are available for teams.
Thank you, Liz. Now, last but not least, let's hear from Daryl.
Well, I think it's really interesting about our business culture. And, one of the things that I try to lead by is a very simple saying, right? And it holds true for our organization. Nobody cares what you know until they know that you care, right? And so when we think about that in terms of leadership, right, you could say, old school, hey, I don't care about your childcare needs, I just need you to be here. That's one way. Or you could say, I want to be aligned with what's best for your family, right? And well, what do you get when you do that, right? How do people feel, and how do they react when you align to them as a whole person versus just as a professional, or as quite frankly, only as what they could do for you? So I think that, as we learn how to better engage virtually, to Jane's point, taking 5-10 minutes out in the beginning of the meeting to just say, just talk informally, hey, and I like being informal. And so it kind of comes easy to me to really have those kind of conversations to say, what movie did you go see, or how's the family, or hey, I heard your son had a game over the weekend, right? Well, how did they do? Or all of those kind of conversations. I think it's been my experience that you get way more buy-in when you buy in, right? So if you want to have people care about your organization, you have to start, and you have to be the leader, and you lead by example by caring about them. And so I don't know if I'm answering the question, but that was very important to us. And then also figuring how we continue to bring new people into the culture and explain to them and continue to build that investment in them so they know who we are, because this won't be always, right? We won't always be virtual, but we will always be us, right? So it's important that we maintain our quote unquote usness, our individuality, our secret sauce of what makes us us. And so that meant also, there are times, Emanuel, where we've had to tell some really smart people, no, you're probably not a good fit for us. Or conversely, we may not be a good fit for you, right? We are so focused on D&I. It's incredibly important to our organization. I'll share with you how we kind of got there. Is, I always cared about it, but one of our larger clients recently said, she said, we give out contracts to diverse firms a lot, right? All the time. And then their workforce shows up. And the workforce shows up, and it turns out the only person that was diverse was the owner, right? And so we started thinking about that. Like, how can we have a very, a workforce that represents what our community looks like, and it represents the actual community, right? People that, so we try to have a workforce that respects to where our clients are based, et cetera, et cetera. And so that became really, really important. And then we think about diversity in the sense of, I know it's cliche, but I really do believe that a more diverse workforce makes a better outcome, right? It's anytime that I've been in groups where everybody thinks the same, it's just kind of different to have to be innovative or thought forward, right? But when I have someone who can bring a different set, and it doesn't have to be experience in the subject matter, it could just be their life experiences are different. And so that gives them a different perspective. And so I think through COVID, you were just forced into some of these situations where you had to be innovative, you had to think different, and having people in the room or in the virtual room, basically who thought different than you was critical, I thought. And so I think that's been incredibly important for our organization.
Daryl, really appreciate that. And I definitely got to keep that quote with me. I think that's a pretty great quote. And we've got to the point where we're going to have the last question, and then we're going to open it up after. But this next question, I think, is kind of focused towards the position that I'm in, because at the time, the past 2 years of COVID, like, I was doing an internship fully virtually, and it was a time where it was really slow. And then I went through the onboarding part, and things started speeding up. Investment bank got really, really busy and logged a lot of hours. So going on to this question, thinking about employees who joined the workforce over the last few years, their normal looks very different. So how are you creating a buy-in situation where the new normal may look different across your team or your company? And for this one, we'll start with Daryl.
Well, so what was it was interesting. Again, I am not a virtual person. I just want to state that again. So a couple of really things happened. A year or two prior to COVID, about a year prior to COVID, we hired, I hate to say this, but we hired our first millennial in the office. And what was different was the way that she approached, well, everything. And I remember having, I'll tell you a really quick story, Emanuel. I remember having a knockdown, drag out debate with her about whether or not she could work virtually, because she said I should be able to work so many days a month virtually. And so finally I acquiesced. I said, fine, do what you need to do. And so it was, she'll work virtually on Fridays or whatever it was. So on Friday, I walk in the office and who's there on her virtual day? I said, what do you hear? She said, oh, I didn't really want to work virtually. I just wanted to have the flexibility to do it. Right. So that taught me a lot about what people's needs were, right? About them just wanting to have that flexibility. On the other hand, as we began to transition back to the office, like everyone else, we faced some resistance because I think that, and I don't mean to say this in a bad way, all of us are selfish to a degree, right? We want what's best for us, and we're not always thinking about what's best for, we want what's best for ourselves. We're not thinking about what's necessarily best for us as a group collectively, right? But how does this, what's best for me? And so a lot of our team did not want to come back even in a hybrid, and there was a lot of pushback, and I had to give a long lead time before we came back, and then start to give warning signals like, T minus, 30 days, right? And I think, it was really interesting. The first day back, I'll tell you what happened. The funniest thing happened. I saw one colleague walk over to another colleague's desk and say, hey, what do you think about this? Right? At that exact moment, I knew I made the right decision, because that's the thing that can't be replicated virtually. And I actually called her into my office and I said, do you recognize what you just did there, right? And she said, I know, I hate to admit it, but you're absolutely right. So I don't know if we'll go back to being 100%. And I know that will make some really tough talent acquisition challenges for us, because I know in this new normal, there are people who say, hey, if I can't work 100% virtually, I'm just not interested. What I think that's going to do, I think it'll be different things for different people, Emanuel. I think that some people will say, okay, well, we've got to change the way that we look at our relationships with our, with our talent or with our employees. Me, I'm the exact opposite. I think it's going to make us take a look at and take a hard look at who we are and say, this is who we are, right? And we're not going to be all things to all people, right? Because then that's how you lose your identity when you try to do that. So that means that some people will think it's great that we'll allow flexibility, but we'll be on site and have this chemistry. And some people will say, hey, that's just not the place for us. And I think we have to be okay with that.
Thank you, Daryl. I'd like to move on to Liz and then Jane afterwards.
Thank you, Emanuel. I think one of the things that we've seen, especially with our millennials or otherwise, but primarily hiring a lot. We're actually seeing higher attrition rates of joiners that have been here and joined in the past year or maybe 2 years. I think that's because of this virtual working, right? The connections and we're hiring in so many different locations. We have people in South Dakota and Idaho and places where we don't have offices. So we are starting to see higher attrition in those groups. So people that are coming and joining the organization and unfortunately maybe leaving soon. And I think part of that is establishing those connections, right? So we want to have as much flexibility as possible. But at the same time, I think many of us realize the value of having opportunities to connect in person, as I'm sitting here in India, right, for a reason. But you do have connections and relationships, and those things come maybe a bit more easily from being in person. So I think we are trying to really encourage people to take advantage of those opportunities to connect in the office. Some groups are doing lunches on Wednesdays or happy hours on Thursdays, or meet the leader sessions, or various things to create the interest and again the purpose in people coming together in whatever way. We're seeing people maybe in locations where we don't have an office. Denver, as an example, getting together now that things are opening. In a Starbucks or in a restaurant. It was in a park last summer, right? Social distancing. So we're trying to make sure that we're creating as much flexibility as possible, but also how do you create those dynamics, those relationships, the collaboration that is meaningful in this hybrid model. And I think, Daryl, to your point, we're trying to figure that out, and each team is really empowered to think about what makes sense for them. So that's a bit of a work in progress, but I definitely see that this is an area of focus for us as we see those attrition numbers, because we don't want people to leave. We want people to join and stay, but we definitely are seeing that. In probably the last year, we've seen an uptick in our leavers.
Very nice. Thank you. Now, Jane, I'd like to hear from you.
Sure. So and we've talked about this a little bit. I mean, one of the things that we're really trying to do is let people know and start with hey, we're going to learn what works. Because you're right, everyone's got a new normal. Some people joined fully remote and they loved it and they wish they would never have to go into the office. Some people were 100% in the office before and are super excited to never come back to an office. Yeah, and some people, miss it, So how do you figure out how to strike a balance for folks? And now we have some people that have been hired with the expectation they'd be 100% remote, because we have some disciplines like our cybersecurity team. We have very specific skill set requirements. They work very specific hours. They tend not to work in teams in some positions. And so there's no point in worrying about whether they're in an office or not in an office. I want to worry about them as a human, as an employee. I want to make sure they're happy and they're getting educated and that they feel a tie to us. But I'll have to think differently about what their employee experience looks like, because I agreed when I hired them that I was never going to ask them to come into an office versus, others. So we've been doing a couple of things. One, we've taken a long time to have a conversation about what people want. What are they worried about? What would good look like? And then, like I said, we've also been now saying, and we're going to learn this together. So we're starting, I literally say on average a day a week, because what I want is for them to think about, and we're spending most of our time talking about, well, what's helpful to do together? What's easier to do in person? So let's spend the time on the stuff that's easier to do in person. But if people are coming in for the one day, just so they can sit there and be on phone calls with other people who are not there that day, that's nuts, right? Like that is not a mode that makes anybody happy about being there. And then we'll keep having a conversation about what's working. I told my leadership team when they were like, well, which day should we tell everyone they have to come? I'm like, are you crazy? Like, we're going to tell people everybody has to be there on a Tuesday. What if your working session makes sense to have on a Thursday or Friday or a Monday or whatever? Or it makes more sense to do 2 or 3 days one week and then none the next week or two, right? So we'll get there. I think we'll learn. I told the team, I said, if we have to worry about starting to pull badge data about who's showing up a day a week, then everybody's thinking about this wrong. And I don't ever want to get to that place. But, to Daryl's point, I have leaders who feel very much like Daryl. They're just not, they love being in person. They want their whole team there. And so how do you help strike the balance of all those things? I think it's going to be about being honest with your teams about where you are, creating a space that people can tell you what they really think. That's what I was writing down earlier, our priorities and satisfaction tool is, because, I think having a tool to have the conversation to understand what people really want. And I'm not gonna be able to make everybody happy. It's a lesson I've learned a long time ago, but like, how do we create something that's that works for people and works for us together, kind of as a team. And again, and I might be jumping into some of the questions that are in the Q&A box, but folks like you, Emanuel, with the your experience, right? I think people assume, they're going to all want to be remote, or they will all X or they will all Y. And the reality is that spectrum is just as wide as every other, like employees that have been here a long time, employees that are close to the office or far. I have somebody that literally during voluntary has been traveling an hour and a half each way into the office on a voluntary basis, 2 days a week. Why? Because he said his house is too small and he can't be around his children that often. Right. That's what worked for him. I was like, okay, great. So anyway, I think we're going to have to just be open and be flexible about it. And I really appreciate that's the way that CNA from an enterprise standpoint is set up.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you all for bringing these unique perspectives and really having a great conversation. Moving on, I would like to invite Kim Nicholas to help us with questions from the audience and bring her to the virtual mic.
Yeah, can you hear me? I guess everyone can hear me, right? Well, we have these great questions, and I thank all of you for your experience that you're sharing with us and your perspective. And I think one of the questions in the chat that doesn't seem to have been answered by you yet is really about recognizing talent that's in the office or, you know, now working from home that maybe you hired for a different set of skills, but you might actually have someone there that's got some capacity that you didn't realize. And as Daryl had described, maybe in an office setting, organically you would discover. Without that, you know, you think here that the Gen Z employees feel like they may have missed out on some opportunities to learn and grow over the last 2 years. And so how do we go about recognizing additional talents and helping people get promoted, and helping the newest employees from this very, could be remote environment or even in a hybrid environment. It's possible that, you could miss each other and not identify some of these opportunities. So when you think like that, like what are we doing to make sure we're seeing that kind of organic talent come through? What do you do to be deliberate about still having that in our new normal? I don't know who wants to go here first. Liz, you want to go first?
I think there's a couple ways to do that, right? You can do that from a process perspective and have kind of formal checkpoints where folks are talking about career development. We actually this week at Merkle and Dentsu, our broader organization company, are hosting what we're calling Careers Week. So it just so happens Kim and Emanuel and we're doing that this week. So we're running a series of workshops across the world for employees to tap into and learn about how do they navigate their career here, what are the tools that we have for them to be able to look at skills and learning opportunities. So we're actually kind of putting those tools and resources into people's hands and making sure that they know what exists and how to tap into it. And so process-wise, there's some of that that's happening. I think the other thing is going back to those people leaders and those managers that, having the conversation, and Jane, you said it too, and Daryl, asking the question, right? I said yesterday we had a town hall with our 6,000 people here in India. And I said yesterday that, it is about being intentional about what you want to do, right? Share your aspirations. We don't have a crystal ball of what roles may develop or organizational things that may happen. And so if, Kim, you tell me, gosh, I'd really like to move to London someday, right? Well, I might note that down and an opportunity may come up and I might remember, oh gosh, you know what? Kim mentioned to me that she's open to an opportunity like that. Or someone says, I really want to learn Salesforce, more certifications. This is an area of focus for us. Put it in your system of record, your goals and your things on record, but also share that with folks because things do change, organizations shift, priorities change, clients in our world ask for different skills and things. And so again, to your point, Jane, sometimes those conversations might be a little daunting, especially for new employees who feel like, well, if I say that, then I might be saying that I want a different job. And how do you create a comfortable space and ways for them to do that so that they're not missing out, but that they're continuing to kind of step through that career path?
Yeah, one of the things, as you were talking, Liz, I have been trying to reinforce with our new employees, with, some of the folks that maybe are more new joiners, like right out of college or whatever, just reminding everyone that no one cares more about your career than you do. So while it is incumbent upon me as a leader to really look for talent and to try to understand who's here and what do they want and those kinds of things, I'm also trying to remind people that it's okay. It's okay to share those things. Because you're right, Liz, completely. I remember having that fear. Well, if I say I want to work on something, are they going to be like, oh, you don't want the job you have? Fine. Well, it's scary when you haven't done it before, right? But I think sometimes having a leader remind you that, your career is yours, and therefore, without having the courage to be able to have those conversations, it's a lot harder. Now, that said, we're actually having, because we have a lot of the same, kind of formal processes, and we actually have a process that's completely separate from performance management, and it's called talent review. And the whole point of talent review is to talk about the talent we have. Who's here in deep skill, who's here and actually broad, who's ready maybe for a new opportunity, what kinds of new opportunities might those be? And it doesn't mean there's always a change that comes out of it immediately, but at least, we get a sense for who the employees are, what do they want, how could we support them? And then I think the other thing we're doing is, we're trying to make sure that we have more planned training. Like our security group, they have a security bites every week, and it's like this little half-hour, snippet that they then record, and it's for them to share things they know or things about the culture or that kind of thing, to just try to really get a better sense and get some more engagement from the teams that are around them, so that they can look at how people are responding and who's engaging, and really try to help use that information. So
for me, I think it's different in a smaller organization where you have a talent acquisition group and you're typically looking for a very specific skill or skill set. And then someone walks through the door and it's the exact opposite of what you need, but they're really bright. And so I think for us that now it's about, if we can find really bright, talented people, even if we don't have a quote unquote specific role for them, we got to be able to find something for smart people to do and a way for them to join and join our organization. We had a young lady earlier this year, and we hired her. She had just an amazing background. We were looking to have her join a PMO that we support for Accenture in Philadelphia, but it just wasn't a fit for that. But the more we talked to her and the more we learned about her background, just exceptional. So we said, you know what, let's just hire her. We'll figure out where to put her later. But, the worst thing in the world for me is to have a room full of really bright people, right? How bad can that be, right?
Right.
In our organization. And as it turns out, Kim, she was a GW alum. So we didn't even know that at the time. But super sharp. And now she's, almost like an idea factory, right? She's always coming up with new ideas or ways that we should do things different. And so I think about that. And then I also think about the fact that what I try to encourage and reinforce in all of our team is, especially the younger ones, right? Is that you may have an idea that is unique to you and no one else has that idea. And so we want you to share it, because if you don't share it, if you don't bring what is uniquely you to our environment, we may miss out. We may all miss out, right? Because there's a perspective that only you have. No one else has it. And so we really want you to share that and not to worry about whether it's a good idea, a bad idea, whether we'll implement it, whether we'll reject it. Hey, let's just hear it, right? And we'll see, where we go with that. And I think that's a way, definitely for us, that's the way to be.
Okay, well, I just want to thank all of you for being here for this hour, happy hour, whatever this was for us all. It's really exciting times, and I'm just grateful for all of your leadership and your advice here, specifically around, management is going to need to be intentional in this environment, and whether that's intentionally social or intentionally seeking talent and discussing talent might actually sort of elevate our ability to manage, because now you need to be deliberate about it, and yet at the same time still be able to have these environments where things happen organically. And so it's going to be an interesting next 2 years, I think, coming out of this, just to watch what happens around engagement, staff retention, this enthusiasm around, being promoted or having more flexibility. What is it that our team is going to seek?
Hey, Kim,
so
before we leave,
yeah.
I got
Wanna
one more
ask?
thing I literally have to say.
Oh yeah, I should give you all. How about that? You get your closing wisdom. Say that, and I'll say my few things about Genesis Works. That's great.
I'm sorry. I apologize, everybody.
We all get to do it, including Emanuel and Omanar. Are you on? Omanar, yeah. What's your words of wisdom departing?
All right. So what I like to think about is how interconnected we all are and how interdependent we all are. I think I mentioned this to you. So I live in the burbs, so I take the Metro in, and there was a gentleman who had a kiosk, a little snack shop in the metro station. I haven't seen him in the past year and a half, right? And so that business is probably how he supports his family, I'm guessing. I was listening to Mayor Adams in New York City talk about how the virtual working from home or working virtually, how it has impacted the local economy, right? What does it mean for people that support folks that go to the office? Think about restaurants. Think about the guy who shines shoes in the Deloitte lobby. Or think about all of these things that we may take for granted. So we're all very interconnected. And so when I talk about making sure that we're not just selfish or thinking about ourselves, these are the things that that I think about. Just like it's almost like when a sports league goes on strike and we think about the players. We don't think about the beer vendors. We don't think about the people working concession stands or the parking lots. Those are all the real people who get impacted. So this shift has impacted really real people, and I hope that we all think about that as well.
Huge.
I'll go next. So I agree with you, Daryl. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I do think it is, those of us that have the privilege of being in a job where we can work remotely, right? And it truly was a privilege during this time. We were not impacted, not nearly in the same way that people who didn't have that opportunity in whatever their job was or their profession. I really feel fortunate about it, and I remind my children about that regularly. And my friends and I have talked about that too. I'm really glad that we spent a lot of this time talking about talent, because I think when you talk about location and office or not, it's really, I was just telling someone else this week, ours is a people business, right? And actually, I think Daryl and Liz, yours kind of is too, right? We don't make a product. I sell insurance policies, but it's data, it's information, it's in systems. What really makes it work is the people who are understanding what our customers need and want, right? The people that are helping fulfill our promise to be there at their time of need. It's about the people. So I do think that I've learned a lot just as a leader and as a human and a professional about what I need to be talking to people about, what I need to be educating myself about, and how do I really just understand the different needs of various people in my organization and do the best job that I can with to help respond to those needs. So I appreciate the conversation. It's been really interesting.
I think for me, and I'll just close, and Emanuel, I see the comment you had put there in the chat. We have a very close relationship with our DEI organization, and it is intentionally separate from HR, because I think there is talent in what we do there, and then there is our DEI priorities and our social impact priorities, and the focus needs to be on those. So my counterpart, who's our Chief Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Officer, reports directly to the CEO, just as I do. We work closely together, and I think to Daryl, your point, and Jane, it's about creating an environment for people where they feel respected, where they feel included, where they feel they can have open and transparent conversations about career, about what's happening, about how do I get promoted. So Emanuel, to your comment. We want to create that transparency and dialogue. We have something that we use in Merkle called our employee promise. and it encompasses 6 kind of primary areas. And I say to employees that my aspiration in this role is to bring the employee promise to life for every person. And that's a different experience for every person. And that's okay for 15,000 people, right? It's different, right? What that means in terms of the career path might be different. I've had, Kim, you might laugh at this, but I've had 5 roles in my time here with Dentsu. They've all been great, but I'm hoping to stick here for a little bit because the organization is fast moving and changing. And as such, I have had different experiences and opportunities. That may not be the case for someone else. That may not be the interest for someone else, but to bring that to life for every person in ways that are meaningful and important, you have to be intentional about it. You have to have it be a business priority, and create the spaces, the tools, and the programs to be able to do that. And I know that's what we're really trying to focus on for every person, for all those new joiners who come in. How do we create the culture and the connections for folks, again, with the workloads that are spiking up? How do we make sure they can contribute to their communities while they're doing their work? So there's a lot wrapped up in that employee promise, but that is really what we're anchoring to and working toward every single day for people. And you have to have the dialogue and the connections there, like you were describing, to be able to know what that means for people and how we can support them in all those different ways.
That's great. Emanuel, you want to go? Get some words of wisdom for us? I know you are the moderator, but given your recent experience joining during the pandemic, I think we could all learn something from you as well.
Yeah, I think from my small perspective that I have, I would say that everything is very lifestyle based for employees, and I think for myself, one thing that I learned is that me as a kid coming out of college versus, someone that's a senior member of a firm and they have, 3 kids and, in the past 10 years, they didn't have a chance to be at home with their kids and they didn't have those opportunities to be able to get that one-on-one relationships. Now they don't want to come in the office anymore. And I think that you have to respect, their wishes because 1, they're the reason why the firm is successful. And 2, everybody, deserves to have their voices heard and have their own perspectives. And I think for me, I was someone investment banking, so happy to come in every day. But now that I have a little bit of availability in terms of being able to come in versus stay home 3 days or 2 days out of the week, I might take that chance if, I'm feeling a little ill and I don't have to feel the pressure to come in. So I would say, just being able to realize, different perspectives and different stages, but I think that's all for me.
Omanar, did you want to give us?
I'll just say quickly, as someone who worked 8 to 10 hours a day, I enjoy being in the office with our work family. Virtually, I don't know when someone's having a bad day. You just can't figure that out in these tiny boxes on the computer. But our work family, for better or worse, I do miss that. No disrespect to Manuel, I have a teenager, but so I need some space from her. But the office environment is one it builds camaraderie, and you miss that because there are days when you want to say, Kim, let's grab a coffee. I got an idea I want to bounce off your head, as opposed to let me make sure her dot is not red in Teams and she's on a meeting, so I have to wait for it to go green, and it's only green for 1 second, then it's yellow back to red, and then you miss the whole opportunity and it's out your head. But more importantly, I look forward to being in the office. There's nothing that can replace a coworker who brings a cake in, Girl Scout cookies. Those things cannot be replaced. And being in corporate sales alone, you have to shake hands, networking events. So I'm looking, socially distancing, but I want to share space with coworkers and friends, because I look at my coworkers as friends and part of my corporate family. So I'll leave it at that.
That's great. Well, so at Genesis Works, as many of you may know, you're employing our current class. That's our 12th cohort. And we're in recruitment for the 13th cohort. And we had, nearly 600 applications, looking forward still to having this professional internship, regardless of whether it's in person, hybrid, or remote. And we were super grateful for all of our corporate partners that were able to pivot even our young interns into having a continued professional experience, even though it was remote and maybe not initially what that young professional had signed up for. And we're just deeply grateful for that and any ongoing partnerships as we develop, so that we can just add more professional opportunities for the young people in Chicago. So just want to thank all of you for being here and for the engagement from the team and from the participants that signed on to be inspired by this team. And we look forward to staying connected.
Thank you all. Thank you, Emanuel.
Thank
for
you so
keeping us on
much.
track.
Thank you all.
Very good. Bye-bye.